Neutral is a place of no movement. It means you're not making progress towards the goals or the ideas that are really important to you. Welcome to Beyond Neutral, where we talk about what gets you stuck and how we can shift and navigate the road forward. As leaders, as professionals, in our careers, or just balancing and creating the kind of life you desire. I'm your host, Paula Reed. Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to today's episode of Beyond Neutral. So we are continuing our discussion around emotions and the gift that emotions give us when experienced in the right levels and in the right way and acknowledged as such, and kind of the derailing aspects that some emotions can have on us when we over-experience them, okay? And we internalize them. So the emotion that we're talking about today is a big one. Today, we're talking about shame. Shame is an incredibly powerful and incredibly destructive emotion when accelerated to levels that are not healthy. And it is a gift when used appropriately. So like all emotions, shame evolved in us from early days of a need for survival. So where shame really came from was it represents a boundary between ourselves and a societal group, whatever that is. It might be our family. It might be, in the early days, obviously in early man, which we're talking about the origins of an emotion. It was the group that was together from a survival standpoint, right? The hunters, the gatherers who all kind of hung together. And shame was an emotional response to doing something about yourself that may in fact have put others at risk. It was about behaviors that were outside of the norms of that societal group. And as a result of feeling shame, it kind of brought you back to the norms, because if you didn't come back to the norms, you'd be exiled, right? And you'd be out on your own. And as you can imagine, early man, if you were out on your own, probably your chance of survival was not very good. So shame is really an emotion that at its gift is humility. And it's a gift of a reminder of social norms. And even today, the gift of shame is humility, and used in the right way and used in the right quantities. Shame is the thing that kind of keeps you from getting over the tips of your skis and reminding you that you're not infallible, right? So it serves a benefit. And in a lot of ways, it's almost the very antithesis of narcissism, right? Shame is, okay? Because it really reminds us that we're just like everybody else. We make mistakes. It keeps us aware of our failings as well as our strengths and as well as our successes, but it kind of keeps our egos in check a little bit. So used in the right way, shame can be incredibly motivating. It can be a really phenomenal balancing emotion for us. And so all of those things can be fantastic when used in the right way. The challenge is that today, shame is often experienced in a very different way. And how shame is often experienced by many of us today is by this self-loathing voice in our head, okay? That rather than just kind of righting us slightly, it's very demeaning to us. It's that voice that's constantly suggesting that we're not enough, okay? We're not smart enough, we're not thin enough, and we're not good enough. We don't deserve something. It can be that feeling of, who do you think you are, by believing in yourself and to a certain extent. And so shame and the emotion of shame and how we experience it as a society has absolutely gone haywire. Okay. It's the story we tell ourselves of not being enough. And it's actually, shame today is really the birthplace of perfectionism. Okay. And we've talked long and hard about how challenging perfectionism is and how it's impossible, right? And when you think of shame, it's like these ideals that are impossible to actually ever achieve. And sometimes it can be around competing ideals that are impossible to achieve. There's plenty of information out there around shame as it relates to social media and how people are presenting this idyllic life, be that a social life, be that idyllic faces, idyllic bodies that are all filtered and they're all they're all fluffed up to really look like they're perfection. And, in reality, nobody actually has that, right? That's kind of this presentation of the idyllic that so many people are looking for. And shame comes with the belief that I'm just not enough. I can't measure up. So very destructive when it's like that. In fact, there's a group of psychologists who refer to shame as the wasteland of the soul because of how destructive it can be as an emotion that's really run amok and taken over. How does it show up when it's destructive? It's that voice, right? And sometimes it's the story that we tell ourselves, not about specific situations where we may have had a behavior that wasn't right. It's really the story we tell ourselves about ourselves, okay? I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. So rather than, wow, I made a mistake in this situation, I'm an idiot. It's that negative self-talk about who you are, not necessarily about a situation or a behavior that you may have misjudged. So very destructive because we are and we become often what we think, okay? And so this constant striving for perfectionism that can't be reached. In women, how that shows up is trying to be everything to everybody. Be powerful, but be kind. Be strong, but be soft. All of those things that you can't be both of. You can't be all of those things. It's impossible, right? In men, it can often show up as a lack of vulnerability or a fear that being vulnerable or being, as I use this word, I hate this word, but emotional is a weakness. None of those things are true. So what do you do about it? Okay. Because first of all, everybody walks around with some level of shame. If you don't walk around with any shame, it's because you have a complete lack of empathy. And I think then you're actually a sociopath. So we all experience some level of shame. And the very first thing is to recognize that experience of not feeling like you're enough in some ways is universal. All right. So number one, recognize that you're not alone in it, because here is the thing about shame that's really amazing. It's kind of like it's like a mushroom almost. It can't live in sunlight. I don't think mushrooms can live in sunlight, but I mean, it's like the moss under a rock, right? If you shine light on it, it dies. In other words, the best antidote to shame is empathy. And that starts with empathy for ourselves, and it goes to offering empathy for other people. Okay. So how do you offer yourself empathy? Number one, like I've said about every single emotion I've talked about, is to recognize it. Recognize the story you're telling yourself in your head. When you make a mistake, prime example, okay, and I've done this a million times, what would happen is, what is that story? I am so stupid. The story can be, I'm so stupid. How could I possibly be that stupid? What am I thinking? Okay, shame, 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 shame. The difference is paying attention to that. The difference is, how do you tell that story differently? You tell that story about isolating it to a mistake that was made in a particular situation. Wow, I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing there. I need to be better at paying attention. Okay. That takes that loathing, that self-loathing about who you are, into a very specific, very tangible action, cause and effect that happened. And in looking at the cause and effect that happened, you're absolutely able to isolate perhaps what it was that you could have handled differently. Okay. So rather than I'm so stupid, okay, wow, I really need to pay attention more. I need to create ways to pay attention more. Okay. You can solve that. Being so stupid, you can't really solve that, right? So the empathy comes to, first of all, giving yourself grace that you make mistakes, that you didn't do something perfectly, that you were human and perhaps you misjudged a situation. So the first thing in turning down the dial of shame is in changing the narrative in your head and trying to really isolate what it is that is bringing that shame, bringing that embarrassment internally to you. Isolate that and address that specific cause and effect, that specific action. The other place to get empathy is to recognize that everybody feels that way and bring it forward. Bring it to a spouse, bring it to a coworker. You've crossed a boundary address the boundary. Hey, I feel really badly that I said ba ba ba. Okay. As soon as you bring that forward, as soon as you shine light on that and you share that feeling, that emotion that you're having with someone else, the shame can't survive. Okay. Because it's an internal processing. And as soon as you bring it out, as soon as you shine the light on it and share it with somebody else, you will be amazed at how it dissipates. Okay. That's number 2, because then the empathy comes. Most people who you approach and say, geez, I'm sorry. I realize I did this. I shouldn't have done this. Most people are grateful for the opportunity to participate in that connection with you and give you empathy. And that is the thing about carrying shame around, is left to just being an internal story, okay, that you connect in your mind. I was stupid, I was ungrateful, I was this, I was that, whatever the story is you're telling yourself. When you're holding that in, the very nature of holding that in requires you to disconnect from somebody and causes you to disconnect from somebody. So it becomes this horrific self-fulfilling prophecy, this very, very vicious cycle that you sit in holding on to that shame. Once you release it and address it and offer somebody your feelings, they're going to, first of all, relate because they've had the same feelings in some way, in some situation, okay? And you're bringing them to light, dissipates it in you, and enables them to connect with you in that moment. And shame does not exist where there is connection. Human connection eliminates shame. Okay? So those are a couple of tips. Shame is very destructive, but we don't need to sit in that destruction. We don't have to live our lives really with this dark cloud of the self-doubt that it brings with it, right? We don't have to have self-loathing. We don't have to focus in on our failures. What we can focus in on is the gift that it gives us, and pay attention to it, that the gift of shame is humility. And so being able to go to another person, or even to yourself, okay? Going to yourself, going to another person, and talking about the very thing that's created that loathing, means the loathing loses its power. So let's use shame as we do other emotions by understanding its gift, embracing its gift, and letting go of the negative overuse of that emotion. Shame is a killer. It's destructive. It destroys our connections. It destroys our self-confidence. It destroys our sense of self. Use it for what it's meant for. Just a little bit of humility to keep you on track. The rest is up to you. So that's my story today. That's what I wanted to address today on our series on emotions. I hope you're doing well. Always happy to talk to you about this and any other topic that you find interesting or compelling. And in the meantime, I hope you keep driving down that road and just keep trying to shift into the next gear. Take care. Thanks so much for joining us on this week's episode of Beyond Neutral. Make sure to visit our website, www.reidandco.com, for this week's show notes. That's reidnco.com. And if you found value in today's episode, I would really appreciate you giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts, or better yet, share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. All of this helps to support the show. Thanks so much. Take care.